Hey everybody, this is Rob with Racing's Natural Aquariums. RNA is in the house with MTA, Multi-Tank Addictions. And today, I'm helping Chris out. He had contacted me a couple days ago that he was putting together a series of videos and collaborations with different people on different aspects of our hobby. I told him that I would definitely help him out and that I would definitely do the real plants or live plants versus fake plants or plastic plants, and what would be recommended for beginners. So I'm going to kind of speak to the beginners that are venturing into planted tanks or something that resembles a planted tank, and I'm going to try to keep it as simplistic as possible because the topic of planted tanks can blow your mind. Low light, high light, mid light, low tech, high tech. For the simplistic version, you have two types of setups. You can have a low tech, which, and like I said, this can create a world of debate, but I'm trying to keep it simple and kind of going back to the roots when I first got in the hobby. Low tech is basically just utilizing lighting and substrate, and high tech is the introduction of CO2 pressurized gas into your tank, which actually increases the growth rate of various plants. So it does go well beyond that scope, where in my 55 that you saw in the beginning of the video is basically a low-tech plant. I don't use CO2. I do use a liquid fertilizer, and I also use a CO2 booster, liquid booster, which don't be fooled by the name of any product. You cannot liquefy carbon. It is a form of algicide, which basically your plants at night will put off CO2 naturally if you go with live plants, and I'll get into that a little bit later. And it just kind of keeps the balance so that I don't wind up with algae unless I want it. Like I have autosynclus, so my 10-gallon sand substrate tank, I do leave some of the algae on the glass so that they have something to eat. So any rate, for a beginner, the quickest and simplistic way is to go to your local fish store or your chain store and buy whatever plant that blows your mind that you want to look at for however long you plan on keeping your tank. So as you saw in the beginning, there are pictures from a few different stores that I was at over the weekend, and you can see that there is definitely a multitude of plastic plants in various colors, as well as a silk plant with various plants and colors as well. I would say though, when it comes to looking natural, at least back when I started a tank, it was a 20 long and it was a dirted tank, and it was back in the mid 80s, late 80s. The internet had really just started to roll out. There was not a lot of information out there on growing plants. Nothing really to do with substrate or lighting. LEDs didn't even exist at that point. And I know I'm dating myself, but I'm not that old. I just look old. I play an old man on TV. So like the big plant back then was the banana plant with the little banana fingers and a couple little shoots. And then a seaweed type plant, whether it be like kabamba or stuff like that. I can't think of names at the moment. It's been a long day and I'm dealing with a snowstorm here in the Northeast. So what a mess it was. It was a complete or epic fail. Cloudy water, fish dying off, plants basically just rotting away. So it was a nightmare. So I think it's awesome that Chris has asked fellow Fishfam, fellow hobbyists to inject some knowledge to make your life as a fish keeper a little bit easier and less frustrating. So again, with the plants, at that time, I had tried the live. It didn't work. I got disgusted. I basically just trashed the tank and redid it, and I put in plastic plants. Back then, they didn't look really natural. It had a very hard look to it, and it wasn't, for me, relaxing or appealing. So eventually, it kind of died off, and it wasn't until I started working for a chain store that had just come out, and I happened to work in the fish room and the reptile room at the time, and that got me back into the hobby. So I basically just did, the rainbow gravels or the river rock or whatever it was at the time. So it just looked too plain for me. So I wanted something better. So as you saw, you can go to a local fish store and you can buy the old school style fake plastics or the new school or silk plants. I would definitely say that's the easiest way to go about getting a planted tank that will appeal to what you want to look at day in and day out. The one picture that you saw of the multicolor plant with kind of little threads hanging off, that's one of the downsides about silk plants. Over time, the plant itself will start to fray from just being in the water, and you'll wind up with thready, raggedy looking plants. Not really a big deal because you don't have to worry about roots. You just pull them out, put a new one in, and that's as simple as it gets. You can mix in a couple of the other fake plastic plants in between to try to give it a more natural look. One of the benefits about having plastic is just that. You can take it out, clean them off, get the algae off, get the brown muck off, stick them back in, and you're golden. So now we'll flip the switch and we'll go to live plants. So with live plants, that's really limited by what you're going to try to grow. You're going to be hard pressed to take something like baby tears and get them to carpet in a low light tank. Not saying it can't be done, but you really need highlight and CO2 injected into the tank to really get it to be as optimal as it can be. In low tech, you can do it. It's a long, drawn out process, and 9 times out of 10, plant usually dies off, and then you're frustrated and you don't want to do it anymore. Some of the easier plants to grow for beginners, you'd want to look at something like Java fern. You could throw some moss balls in. You can grow various mosses, various anubiases that you would, glue to or tie down to a rock or driftwood or whatever the case might be. And then you don't have to really get extravagant with your lighting. You can just get, like on Amazon, on my 10-gallon, I came across a Nicrew 19-inch or 20-inch white and blue light, and my crypts that are in there are growing well. Another good plant is wisteria, but it will take over your tank if you don't stay on top of it. And a few other plants. So the pros of live plants is it gives you a more natural looking tank. It definitely is a benefit to your tank. It helps to absorb the excessive nitrites that are in the tank. It will also house microorganisms that your fish will eat. And it kind of helps filter the water. If you don't tend to your plants and they start dying off, then it's counterproductive. Then it starts throwing your water parameters off and things like that. So the pros for live plant is it's very healthy for your tank as well as your fish. It also hosts microorganisms to feed your fish. But when you get into live, you need to take into consideration your substrate. You need to take into consideration your lighting, what type of plant you intend on growing, and if you are in need of any sort of fertilization. And there's a ton out there that you guys know of, so I won't even do any name dropping here. As well as, lost my train of thought, sorry folks, lighting, substrate, the type of plant you want to grow, and fertilizers, or if you really need CO2 to grow the plants. Also, too, there are times like I belong to a plant pack type club, subscription-based plant, where I get plants every month. Unfortunately, in the north, being it's been so cold, you battle the cold and hope that the plants, survive the trip from point A to point B. Whereas I could go to the local fish store, but the pricings, as you look back at the other picture, you'll see the various pricings for the plants. That's a downside of live plants. It does cost, and it can cost, especially like in my case, I utilize the Eco-Complete, and it's capped with gravel just because I have bottom dwellers, which have been fine. No barbel issues, none of that. I also use a all-in-one fertilizer, and I also use root tabs for my sword plants, which are heavy root feeders, and I use iron. And now with that being said, as a beginner, you're kind of sitting there going, wow, that's a lot of stuff. And that's where I will tell you, as a beginner or somebody that is not having a successful run in growing planted tanks, do research. You may be trying to put the wrong plant into the tank, or you're not putting in the macro and micro nutrients that plant needs. I mean, you take a sword plant, you throw it in there, and you're fertilizing and think that you're helping the plant out. You're not. It doesn't feed. It doesn't get its fertilization, its food from the water column. It gets it from its roots. So you really need to introduce root tabs into your substrate or clay balls that have the nutrients in it, and plant it up, above that in the substrate. So, I think for beginners really starting out, plastic or silk is the way to go if you don't want to do the maintenance. If you just basically are going to do your water changes, and that you want to watch your fish swim around and relax and enjoy it. And there is nothing wrong with that. If you really like, as you see on various channels, the planted tanks, the heavily planted or the sparsely planted, or somewhere in between, just do the research. And then if your tank is already set up and running, you pretty much are limited to what you have set up if you don't want to invest any money into it, whether it be for a new light, stronger light, fertilizers, things like that. So, I mean, things like Anubias again, wisteria, octopus grass, which is taking over my tank now, which I'm going to do another trim. Some various swords and various crypts is really enough to get you started, get your sleeves wet in the planted tank. So with something like that, I mean, the fish, when they do their business in the water, that's fertilization. Yeah. So that definitely helps out your plants as well. And leaving some of the mulm down there in the bottom, not vacuuming it all up for those stem feeders, and some of the root feeders will draw some nutrients from that. But if you leave too much in, it gets counterintuitive or counterproductive, and actually starts to mess with your water parameters, starts raising your nitrates and things like that, and then your fish suffer. So in a nutshell, beginners, what I did was I found a piece of driftwood walking the shoreline. I prepped it, and I built my tank around that piece of driftwood, which now you can't even see. And I knew what type of lighting I had, and I knew what type of substrate I was going to use, and I started. And then a lot of the evolution was through trial and error. I thought I had a light that was really bright enough to handle the plant, so I know that certain plants will not grow in my tank, because of trial and error. So now that I've kind of upped my lighting game, my fertilizer game has been there, I may try that again and say, okay, it's working. So it was my light. Through the process of trial and error, you'll find out what will work in your tank. So beginners, no fuss, no muss. go to your craft store, throw in whatever plants that you see that trip your trigger, float your boat, fill your fish tank, and stick them in the gravel and enjoy. No fuss, no muss, and I'm going to steal somebody's phrase, it's easy peasy. You want to take it to the next level, start out slow, do the research, come to the live chats, ask the questions. We're all here to help you guys be successful as possible. So low light or low tech plants, you're running, Fluval 2.0, you can probably work your way up to some highlight plants depending on the depth of your tank. But for the beginner just getting your feet wet, Java fern, Java moss, various swords, various crypts, wisteria, water sprite, and I don't even think really in my 10-gallon sand, I really didn't even fertilize, and my wisteria is basically taking over the center section of my tank. My Anubiuses are growing well. My Bucephalandra is actually doing well. So do the research, and if you're not sure, come see the Fishfam. We're here to help. We'll get you going, and we'll get you in the right direction. So you can grow whatever you want, but you have to be willing to put in the time and the work. So with the planted tanks, as leaves start to age and die, you have to trim them off. Don't let the plant waste its energy trying to continue to draw nutrients from a dying leaf until it's finally dead. Just trim it off. Whereas, silk plant, if it starts to rust, starts to fall away, starts to fall apart, pull it out, buy another one, stick it back in there, and enjoy. So, folks, I hope you enjoyed this high-level overview of live versus plastic and what's recommended for beginners. And Chris, I certainly thank you for the opportunity to collaborate with you, brother, and hopefully we've helped some folks out there. And then hopefully we'll see some more YouTube channels with a lot more planted tanks, whether it be fake or real. The choice is yours. So easy peasy or maintenance. The choice is yours. Thanks for watching, guys. This is Rob, Racing's Natural Aquarium, wishing you a blessed day. God bless, peace, and keep those sleeves wet.